Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Those of you on YouTube and our Cloud Zendo are joining our chaplaincy cohorts from 2022. And we're joined, of course, by the speaker, Rhonda V. Magee, who's a wonderful, let me just read her intro because there's too many things to remember, and she's just such an amazing person. So, Rhonda V. Magee, called by some the mother of the movement to integrate mindfulness and racial justice efforts. She's a professor of law at the University of San Francisco and has spent more than 20 years exploring the intersections of anti-racist education, social justice, and contemplative practices. She is an internationally sought after public speaker, thank you very much, mindfulness teacher, practice innovator, storyteller, and thought leader on integrating mindfulness into higher education, law, and social justice. A student of a range of Buddhist traditions and a fellow of the Mind and Life Institute, she has served as an advisor to a range of leading mindfulness-based professional development organizations, including the Mind and Life Institute, the University of Massachusetts Center for Mindfulness, and the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society. Rhonda's award-winning book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, Healing Ourselves and Transforming Our Communities Through Mindfulness, was named one of the top 10 books released for the year by the Greater Good Science Center and received similar recognition by Psychology Today and the editors of mindful.org. So Rhonda, I'm going to spotlight you. Thank you so much for your presence and your continued teaching and chaplaincy and at our humble Zen Center. Deep bows.
Thank you so very much, my dear Kigaku Noah. It is a tremendous honor and privilege to be with you all. Today, as always, as a fellow student of Roshi Jones and a member of this Sangha, it is always really a joy and an honor to sit with you, to be with you, and of course to be able to reflect with you on how it is with us as individuals, soft-bellied human beings, bearing up in the particular moments of our lives, in the midst of, well, all the 10,000 things, all the challenges. So for the next 30 minutes or so, few minutes, I want to share with you on the theme of Metta in a time of war. This invitation to come and to share remarks with you actually came, I think, a bit before the latest sort of wave of despair coming this time in the wave I'm speaking to in particular, the international sort of despair at scale wave that emerged on the world scene some 12 days ago, when we all learned that the political leader of Russia had instigated this aggression, this war against the neighboring country of Ukraine. And of course, to say Metta in a time of war is not necessarily to point to that war, because actually, wherever we are, we may be, in most of us, in one way or another, inquire for ourselves, are we witnessing some kind of war where we are? So I will use this word war as a kind of a pointing toward, like a placeholder for the many different ways that we find ourselves in the midst of deep struggle. On the one hand, right? So that metaphorical way in which any one of us might be facing different types of wars. Right? As practitioners of the Dharma, students of the Dharma, we of course know that to live is to be met with conditions that can tempt us into our own personal wars within, and then of course interpersonally. So that's the struggles, the different ways that we struggle have of course been central to the many different teachings that we have encountered along the path, invited by this community at Upaya, but really over the millennia since the teachings of the historical figure known as the Buddha. We struggle as human beings. And so, on the one hand, of course, the core teachings of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, these core teachings were lovingly developed and transmitted, and have been lovingly held and transmitted generation after generation for some 2,500 years as a support for us in working with all the different wars that we might face, internal, interpersonally. But unfortunately, we also know that there are times when it's not just these internal wars, these struggles with the three poisons of clinging to that which is changing, pushing away or being aversive toward that which is necessarily wanting to be seen, known in an intimate way, or just remaining in a fog of ignorance. Right? These traditional hindrances to kind of moving through life with more ease. We know that as human beings we can cling based on so many different things. We can find ourselves distraught, dissatisfied, in distress. In my own life right now, I'm dealing with what's the word? My heart is broken by an illness in my family. Right? I know, like we all know, that a human life is going to be beset with illness, and yet when we're talking about major illness, even the metaphor of war is often used, right? Whether it be cancer, which is part of the illness that this particular family member of mine is dealing with, living with. Even the medical establishment gives us the metaphor of the war, right? Through which we're meant to battle cancer. And then, of course, so many of our loved ones and maybe members of this community on this call who are living with cancer often are experiencing intersecting illnesses, and this is true of my own family member, my own sister, right now. So in a very personal way, if I think of the personal war that I'm most up against right now, it's this war against the cancer in my family, literal cancer, and all of the different ways it's reminding us in the midst of the coronavirus crisis, in the midst of all of the other, difficulties that we face, reminding us again of our vulnerability, of the preciousness of the lives that we have, the fact that none of them, there's no way out of this alive, so to speak, right? So we know that no matter how blessed we are to have encountered each other, to have known love, to have learned some measure of practices and teachings to help us navigate a difficult world. We know at a certain point our lives will come to an end, and as will the lives of those we love. So this is true in the best of times. But when we are also faced with what appears to be a kind of war of choice, wherein by all reliable sources and accounts, because of the political desires of one regime in a particular country, ripples and waves of violence, shortened lifespans, complete disruptions, right? Migrations away from the country and away from the safe places toward more safe places. All of this is happening in our midst. And even though for many of us, we sit, miles and miles, thousands of miles away from the front of that particular literal war in Ukraine, we have been impacted by this news. We are impacted by the news of violence in our neighborhoods. We're impacted by the news of other wars that we have witnessed and that are raging right now. I was reminded this afternoon of the war, for example, the civil war going on in Ethiopia. Right? So there are many different wars happening. Metta in the time of war. How is it that these practices, the practices we call Metta, can help us? I'll just share a little bit of how Metta has been helping me through these various kinds of wars that I've been naming and pointing toward. And as I do so, of course, with humility, I invite your own reflection inwardly, creating a space right here, right now for turning toward the struggles that you're facing, feeling the confidence of and the faith in these practices and in this community of practice to help us turn toward rather than away from the things that cause us such despair. And as Kigagu was so kind to name, as I share with you some of how I've been leaning into metta practice, I'm drawing on not only the moment that we're in and the events of right now, but also these years of working with lawyers and law students and those who are, in this kind of beautiful and poignant way, signing up year after year to run toward the fire of conflict, not with weapons, but with a range of conflict management, conflict resolution, conflict transformation skills, restorative justice skills, more and more. Right? So I've been working with law students over the years to develop within themselves ways of accessing a broad range of secular skills, but also, frankly, more than that, sliding it in stealthily, opening the door to whatever the students might be willing to hear in the way of broader support for running toward the fire of conflict with a deep, deep set of resources. And so, yes, I've been bringing mindfulness meditation to my law students and metta, loving kindness practices to them, compassion practices. So, as I speak to you, I have kind of hear my belly, if you will, like these many years of leaning into mindfulness and metta practices in more or less traditional spaces, if you will. Some secular, some dharmic spaces, in my own home, in my own relationships with my own family, doing this racial justice work. And so, I mean, I can say that at the outset, I feel like I have, from this base of experience, some good news to report, at least from my own personal experience. From my own experience, I really do feel confident. I do feel supported, having kind of put metta practice, to some tests in my own, 54 years on the planet. Including again on this day and in this week when I've been drawing on the practices of metta to assist me in holding my sister's hand from a distance. We're separated by many, many states. I'm in the state of California. She's on the East Coast. Nevertheless, we've spoken that visual of I'm holding her hand. And yet it's been hard for me to imagine this sister who is older than I am in the kind of distress that she's in. And of course, as we reflect on our loved ones in the stress, for me, the path of the Dharma has been a support for seeing how this experience, our own personal experiences, our own little lives, open the door to that which we have in common with everyone else. So, turning toward the vulnerability of just being human. And yes, going through times when we're ill. Sometimes we heal and we restore and we revive. But we know at one point we won't. And our loved ones won't. So just bearing up with this vulnerability that my sister is facing, I have found myself sitting in my own daily sitting meditation practice, cultivating that bodhicitta, the sort of loving, kind wish for ease, for warmth, for well-being. That I think for me is the foundation of my meditation practices, actually. But leaning into it in particular in these difficult times reminds me of really the story that we're given through those who've translated the early teachings of the Buddha. The teaching story around how loving kindness practice was first delivered by the Buddha. Some of you may be familiar with this story that tells us, and I recently listened again to the translated teachings of given to us by Bhikkhu Bodhi, right? One of a master translator of the teachings of the Buddha in our time, who shares how it is that this loving kindness practice, the practice that we've received, a practice that often invites our, reflecting on the wishes we carry in our own hearts for ease, for well-being. I think of 4 ways that I often articulate the loving kindness blessings. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well in body and in mind. May we be safe from inner and outer dangers. May we be truly joyful, easeful, and free. Filled with loving kindness in a way that includes ourselves, but is not limited to ourselves, as I'll share a bit more fully in a moment. but certainly in a way that includes ourselves. May we be filled with loving kindness. That's a pretty good place to start when we're feeling any kind of distress. May we and all those whose pain, suffering, illness, difficulty we turn toward, may we be filled with the kindness, a love, a support, ease. May we be well in body and in mind. And of course, we know that mind-body duality is something that we work to dissolve, and nevertheless, these concepts can help us a bit as we're working through all of this. May we be well in body and in mind, right? Helping us remember the ways that how we are in mind interrelates with how we are in body, and there are illnesses of both body and mind. May we be safe from inner and outer dangers. Yes, inner dangers, the habits and conditionings, including those related to how we deal with vulnerability, related to sickness, war, conflict. Like, what are our personal habits and patterns? Do we turn toward? Do we turn away? Put our head in the sand? Procrastinate? Not want to deal with it? Kind of maybe send the casserole across town, but not actually want to sit with the person and hold their hand through the struggle. Each of us has our habits and patterns. And we know that some of how we suffer may be related to the particular habit that we have, the habit mind. So may we be safe from inner and outer dangers. What are the inner dangers that exacerbate our pain? There's the traditional teaching of the 2 arrows, right? The first arrow being the pain, the cancer diagnosis, the salvo of war, near or far. The second arrow, what's the second arrow? Everything we do with that news, the ways we might cling to it, churn it, tell a story of constant war and all of the parades of horribles that we think might happen. But we don't know. We don't know. So noticing the way the second arrows come our way, and then doing what we can to sort of deflect them, disrupt their path toward our own body and being. This is what I think of when I think about looking at the inner dangers and supporting ourselves with loving kindness practice. May we be safe from inner and outer dangers. And the outer danger part is real too here when we're talking about war and conflict and violence. The Buddha's teachings actually acknowledge there are outer dangers in the world in which we live. And it's not anything to be ashamed of that we feel ourselves vulnerable to outer dangers. And we weep at the thought that our loved ones, or even people we don't know, might be suffering violence and aggression. May we be safe from inner and outer dangers. And then that fourth of the particular phrases of loving kindness that I most often lean into. May we be truly joyful, easeful, and free. Really inviting. Letting go releasing, relaxing into joy, into ease, into liberation, into freedom. There are many different ways that each of us on this call might traditionally or often or habitually articulate the loving kindness blessings to the degree that we have this as part of our personal practice. But turning back to the teachings of Bhikkhu Bodhi, and also a friend and teacher of mine on the path, Bhikkhu Analayo, who also has been a scholar of early Buddhism, whose teachings have given me a great deal of solace during these times. The teachings remind us that these loving kindness blessings, which many of us have heard, the 4 phrases that I mentioned, I'm not sure if Jack Kornfield was the first teacher that I heard share them. I don't think he was, but it was many years ago, probably 25 years ago, I first heard the loving kindness blessings articulated, and it may have been through Jack Kornfield's teachings. It may have been through Norman Fisher's teachings. He's another teacher of mine, Zen Master Norman Fisher. But I do remember hearing them many years ago, and hearing them presented almost as here is a kind of a blessing, a way of cultivating compassion and ease and kindness. And I just remember, however they were first articulated, I heard them and I thought, wow, this just feels delightful just to hear. That we might, in a time of distress, just for ourselves and for others, pause and reflect. May we be filled with loving kindness. Wow, yes. I needed that then, and I still need that now. But what I've learned recently in listening to these, in reading and studying with these early scholars of Buddhism, I've learned much more about how loving kindness teachings were embedded fully, right, in the broad Dharma. That they were never really meant to be presented sort of isolated and apart from the Dharma, apart from the path. This is not to say that we can't, find ourselves benefiting from, for example, these many beautiful apps. I usually have my phone somewhere up. I can pull a phone up, right? We've got the apps that just give us the loving kindness dose when we need it, or I might in one of my classrooms offer loving kindness blessings. There has been research that has shown that loving kindness blessings can help set the stage for a difficult conversation about race and racism. So I have often, presented these teachings in kind of secular settings. But to go back and really study and reflect on how it is that in the original teachings, they were meant to be not just part of the 4 Brahma Viharas, right? Not just part of these 4 immeasurables or noble abodes, right? Kind of boundless blessings, which again, I just love all of these, the immeasurables, the boundless abodes, the noble abodes. Like, you're just like, for me, every time I hear, and I love loving kindness. So I can very easily feel like, just let me lean in and get a little bit, give me a spoonful of that. Like I could just want a dose of it, right? So yes, these 4 noble abodes, the idea that we might, as practitioners, as followers of the path, find ourselves delivered in some way to the abode, the home of this immeasurable, boundless goodness of loving kindness. But metta, loving kindness, being the first of 4, the other 3 are also relevant, right? Compassion, the will to take action to alleviate the suffering of others, sympathetic joy, mudita, joy in the joy of others. That includes our own joy, right? It's joy in the joy of ourselves and others. And then the 4th Brahmavihara, noble or ennobling or immeasurable state. Equanimity, right? Equanimity or equipoise, that ability to flow with these difficulties. So metta, loving kindness, being one of those four, it's important to think about how they are, and how nevertheless metta apparently was offered as specifically a support for meeting fear on the path, meeting difficult emotion on the path. In fact, Bhikkhu Bodhi talks about the original teaching story of monks at the time of the Buddha at a monastery with the Buddha, having decided to go out into the forest and practice, find a place away from the monastery where they might practice and go on alms rounds and just sort of really explore a bit. Went out together, a great group of monks. They used the number 500 apparently in the early scriptures often just to mean a huge number, right? So the 500 monks went out, and they found this place, this beautiful clearing of forest. And the teaching story goes that they sat and had a delightful, beautiful night together, meditating, got up the next day, went to the local village, went on alms rounds, and the villagers met them with kindness and appreciation, and they went back and meditated. And for several days, it was this easeful, joyful experience. You can just imagine a beautiful night in a spring or fall or summertime period where the weather is availing and the moonlight is beautiful and all is well. And then the teaching story goes, after a few days, the monks, each individually, started to feel discomforted, unrest, sadness, despair. And in their own different ways were feeling what the teaching story suggests might have been these sort of spirits, earth divas, right? These beings who kind of basically were scaring the monks, right? And so they started to just acknowledge that instead of like meeting each other each morning, smiling, they were having restless nights, they were unhappy. And so they decided together to go back to the monastery and back to the Buddha and ask for support, for some sort of teaching to help them find again the ease, the peace, the sense of serenity and contentedness that had been a part of the experience before the earth deities came and made them so unhappy and fearful. And the story goes that the Buddha listened to the monks and said, instead of staying here, the monks should go back to the place where they were afraid. Go back to that forest. Go back to that village. Go back to that region and offer metta. And the teachings first describe radiating metta. So this is, I think, is really important for those of us who think of loving kindness as these blessings articulated near circles near and far, starting with a benefactor, someone who's been kind to us, and then ourselves, and people that we're neutral toward, and right, many of us have heard about loving kindness being offered in those ever expanding circles of concern, including those that have caused harm or those with whom we may be in conflict. But the teachings actually describe metta as something that we might just allow to radiate from inside, like the warmth of, Thich Nhat Hanh used this phrase, the sun of our hearts. So our heart as the sun that might radiate metta. Can you imagine that? So putting aside maybe even the verses, just imagine cultivating the sense of the warmth, the love, however it is, whatever that phrase is that might capture what inspires you on the path. And imagining that inwardly radiating outward in a way that if someone were near you and could feel it, they would feel love, they would feel your wish for their well-being. This is metta at its sort of essence, this cultivation of the warmth and loving heart within us. And so from this place of being able to kind of radiate a sense of love that includes our own suffering, tired, fearful body, from that place, then yes, we might offer phrases, as the Buddha reportedly suggested to the monks to offer to the spirits and the villagers. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well in body and in mind. Offering this to those with whom we may be in conflict, to those who may be doing harm to ourselves or to others. May you be safe from inner and outer dangers. May you be truly joyful, easeful, and free. Finally, one of the things that I've recently been fortunate to encounter in these teachings from Bhikkhu Bodhi was this reminder that, again, not only loving kindness as part of the 4 Brahma Viharas, part of the Eightfold Path, and therefore intimately associated with the ethical commitments that support us. And in particular, the commentaries on the teachings of loving kindness that have been translated indicate that loving kindness was meant always to be a part of a moral path, an ethical path. And that it was introduced as after those on the journey had been invited to cultivate a kind of moral or ethical foundation for loving kindness. And I think this has actually been very important for me to sit with. The ethical commitments are very essential to our being able to feel the liberation and the ease and the joy of the Brahma Viharas. That we're living ethically, morally upright. So 8 moral guidelines in particular are found in the commentaries associated with the first teaching of loving kindness. First, practical skill in cultivating spirituality in our daily life. Are we cultivating spirituality in our daily life? Are we seeing a skillfulness in how we listen to other people, even those with whom we disagree? Are we seeing skillfulness in how we meet the sad facts of our mortality? So that, our being met with the news of illness, yes, can make us sad, but doesn't somehow disrupt our continued commitment, our faith in these practices. So practical skill in cultivating spirituality in daily life. One of the first historical underpinnings of loving kindness. The second, uprightness and honesty. We know honesty, truthfulness in our speaking, minimizing harm in our speech. We know this is an important foundation of the path. Right speech, one of the 8-fold path factors, but uprightness and honesty, a kind of moral rectitude, as a foundation for loving kindness. So we're not just pulling loving kindness out of thin air. The third ethical foundation, openness to learning and being corrected. Openness to learning and being corrected. How often do we need this on the path, especially if we think of loving kindness as a particular support for the fearfulness and difficult emotions, anger that can come up in our interpersonal conflicts. Being open to being corrected, open to learning. The third ethical foundation for loving kindness. The fourth, gentleness, softness. We think of loving kindness as being cultivated by support of a gentle effort. So that gentleness, that softness. So noticing when we're being rigid with ourselves, with those that we seek to meet. The fifth, humbleness, humility always, of course, really important on the journey. But certainly this humbleness with which we might offer loving kindness, knowing that we need these offerings as much as we might offer them to others. Not offering them in a kind of a prideful way, like we have all the answers, but with a hand outstretched to our brothers and sisters on this journey. The sixth, contentedness. Cultivating some contentment, right, in our lives. So noticing what is well within us. And seeking as much as we can to just expand the sense that we have enough. And despite the difficulties we face, we can be well within them. Seventh, a kind of inner lightness, including not being overly burdened with tasks. How can we offer loving kindness if we ourselves are overburdened with tasks? We are flat out, we are exhausted, and yet we want to offer loving kindness. First, can we bring loving kindness to ourselves by lightening the load, letting go of some of these tasks when we are overburdened, and just putting that oxygen mask on ourselves first. Okay? And then the eighth, this calm, peaceful mindfulness in response to provocations. And again, everything I'm saying is in some way or another already part of the Eightfold Path. But I was really heartened to see these particular articulations of Bhikkhu Bodhi in particular was describing these ethical foundations as having been presented as foundations for loving kindness in the original teachings. And so I want to pause here, and the light here is doing what it does here. So I'm going to shift myself a little bit. Pausing to allow us to think about the way we are feeling the challenge of practicing metta at this time, or perhaps feeling the joy of practicing metta at this time. Taking a deep breath together. And as we do so, feeling what is well within us, even amid struggle. And opening up that quality of the sun, our hearts. Allowing ourselves to experience radiating metta as a support. And so as we, on the next day or in the next phase of our journey, whether it's opening up an email or a text or information in the news, giving us more sadness happening in the actual war in Ukraine or Ethiopia or some other part of the world, our neighborhoods, may we find support for our journey in these simple, beautiful practices that we point toward when we utter the beautiful blessed phrase of metta and the phrases of metta. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well in body and in mind. May each and all, may all beings be safe now and always from inner and outer dangers. May all beings be truly joyful, easeful, and free. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda, so much from the Dallas airport. So good to see you. We'll be in touch.
Thank you, my dear Roshi.
All right.
Rhonda.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rhonda.
Blessing.
Blessings to
There
each
is
and
nothing
all.
better than metta and gratitude at this time. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry about your friend.
Thank you.
Pi residents will chant the 4 vows.